As the federal shutdown continues, Democrats have coalesced around a rationale for their continued opposition to a border wall. They're no longer telling you that walls are too expensive. That was a laughable argument coming from the left, so they've given up. They're not telling you that walls don't work, because obviously they do. Everybody knows that. The problem they are now telling us, and you just heard it, is that God doesn't like walls. They're immoral. As Beto O'Rourke noted the other day, walls, quote, ensure death. Building a wall is the same as committing murder.
Welcome back to Check the Facts, where I'm probably going to make someone foam at the mouth. And as usual, it will be the offended marshmallows. When you decide to put your foot in your mouth, you get a video like this. Representative Gutierrez decided to take it upon himself to tell people that President Trump would have allowed King Herod to murder Jesus because of his immigration policy. Because that didn't sound idiotic enough, he proceeded to say that it was repugnant and astonishing to him that during Christmas, and then he paused to tell everybody that he likes to be inclusive and sometimes he calls it holidays, and then continued to say that during Christmas, a time in which we celebrate Jesus, he had to flee for his life with his mom and dad, and thank God there wasn't a wall that stopped him from seeking refuge in Egypt. Then O'Rourke has to mouth off and say that walls ensure death. Well, here's a fact you overlooked. The reason for this border wall in the US is to stop people from cheating their way into the United States. There is an entrance, they must use it, that's that. And the fact that you use Jesus as an example in hopes of touching all our hearts and changing our evil minds, but using your example in the wrong way, shows that you've already failed your argument, because God likes walls. He really likes them. He revels in them. He encourages them. In fact, why don't we just hear from him? This is my personal Bible. It's the TLB translation. It just has a little bit of writing on it on this page, but my entire Bible has a ton of writing, cover to cover, front to back, upside down, side to side, because I do a lot of studying, a lot of reading, and I made it a point to really know this. It's right for us to help immigrants because it's our responsibility and we're called to do so, but it's not right for us to be taken advantage of, to be lied to be stolen from. And what really annoys me about the liberal view of not putting up this wall and allowing everyone to come in is that it takes away from the purpose of citizenship, and it continues to allow immigrants and illegals to take advantage of us. And they don't realize that the decisions they make will affect the rest of the country, and not everyone agrees with them. There is an entrance. That entrance needs to be used. And people need to do this the right way. This is the book of Nehemiah. This book reminds me a lot of the liberals and the bleeding hearts of the world because they're against building the wall. And Nehemiah and his people had a lot of opposition trying to build the wall too. So it starts off by him asking how things were going in Jerusalem. And he was told that things are not good because the wall of Jerusalem is torn and the gate is burned, which means that these people had no security. They had no protection. They couldn't help themselves. They were easy targets. And Nehemiah was so grieved that these walls were torn and Jerusalem was just open for invasion pretty much that he actually cried. He was so grieved. So he prayed to God for help. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king, and one of the customs at the time was that you could not be sad in front of the king because that could easily mean your death. So it was a big mistake to ever show any kind of emotion other than happiness. And because Nehemiah was so distressed about the wall being torn down, he was sad, accidentally showed it in front of the king, and the king asked him why he was sad. So of course he was very frightened, but he told the king his troubles and even asked to go rebuild the city and the walls. So the king agreed and also gave him official letters to the governor so that Nehemiah can get the job done. In verse 8 it says, "The king granted these requests, for God was being gracious to me." God wanted that wall built. So he went and he told the plan to his people, and they were all excited and they got to work right away. They wasted not a moment. And then came the liberals and the bleeding hearts of the world and the marshmallows. And they were even addressed by name. Verse 19, it says, "When Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab heard of our plan, they scoffed and said, 'What are you doing rebelling against the king like this?' But I replied, 'The God of heaven will help us, and we his servants will rebuild this wall, but you may have no part in this affair.'" Now look at chapter 4. Enemies oppose rebuilding the wall. That kind of sounds familiar. Sanballat was very angry when he heard that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and insulted and mocked us and laughed at us, and so did his friends and the Samaritan army officers. So these people were trying to aggravate the situation. These people were in position of power, and if this wall was built, it would ruin them. They were thinking of themselves and how they would look and what would happen to them. They didn't care about the wall. They didn't care about the people. So they would do everything in their power to stop the building of this wall. And it gets worse because as you read in chapter 4, it got to the point where they, the enemies, wanted to kill them. So now Nehemiah and his people decided to put guards up to watch the wall and the builders constantly. These people were so determined because they knew they were doing a good work and it was right to build this wall. They had both their tools to work and their weapons to attack just in case, because it's come to this point. And chapter 6 is continued opposition to rebuilding the wall. In this chapter, there's a plot to kill Nehemiah because the wall was almost complete. Then they had a glorious moment in verse 16. It says, when our enemies and the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated, and they realized that the work had been done with the help of our God. Now this one's really going to trigger the liberals and the wall haters. Foreigners are expelled. On that same day as the laws of Moses were being read, the people found a statement which said that the Ammonites and the Moabites should never be permitted to worship at the temple, for they had not been friendly to the people of Israel. Instead, they had hired Balaam to curse them, although God turned the curse into a blessing. When this rule was read, all the foreigners were immediately expelled from the assembly. This is from 2 Chronicles 32. Chapter 5, Jerusalem was about to be attacked. Verse 5 says, then Hezekiah further strengthened his defenses by repairing the wall wherever it was broken down and by adding to the fortifications and constructing a second wall outside it. And here's my favorite one, straight from Jesus. In Mark 12, he used this in a parable. A man planted a vineyard and built a wall around it. And not only that, he built a watchman's tower. Moving on to John chapter 10. This is for the liberals, the Democrats, and the illegal immigrants who refuse to listen to the law. Anyone refusing to walk through the gate into a sheepfold who sneaks over the wall must surely be a thief. He uses this illustration to say that he is the shepherd and his people are the sheep. And if we keep reading, in verse 10 it says, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. It just doesn't get any clearer than that. Following the laws, that's the right thing to do. If you don't, you pay the price for it. And people like this will always be looking over their shoulders in fear of being caught. God does like walls. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Educate yourself!